I know, I do appreciate that it's a bold claim to say that this is the God equation, but nonetheless I'm making it. And I want to explain why I'm so certain to you, to see if you can prove it to yourself too, and then the rapture can begin, and we can get on with the future, and it's going to be brilliant. Much, much better than the current madness we're seeing in the world. So let's get on with it. Steel yourselves for some physics. So here's my time particle theory about what photons are. Okay. And it describes a bubble that exists, and that bubble is spinning about the east-west axis, and it's orbital around the north-south axis, and that's orbital angular momentum. That's physical terms. So it's a perfect sphere, and it has a duration of that. It's called Planck's constant, 6 point blah blah times 10 to the minus 34 seconds. So it's a really, really tiny duration of existence for this bubble, and it's so tiny that it is a perfect sphere, and you need to know that. It's how small can a sphere have to be in order to be perfect, and it's that size. Okay? It's a measure it in seconds, how long it lasts. It's just so tiny. And what happens is that something happens, and a wave appears in the surface of the bubble. Now, and it reaches an angle. Yeah. Now, I've drawn this at 90 degrees. It isn't 90 degrees. It's a tiny angle, but I've exaggerated it to show it. It's actually 1/137th of an arc second, which is really, really tiny, so don't worry about it. So the principle is simply this: that something happens, and there's a wave in the surface. The wave upsets the relationship between the square root of 2, the hypotenuse of the triangle there. Yeah? So that straight line is the square root of 2. And that is upset. That relationship is changed. And that increases the tension, the surface tension. And it results in a vector, because the right-hand end, I'm pointing at here, because of the motion of the wave, the tension is in that direction. So the wave pushes the tension here. That tension puts a bending moment at the center, and a bending moment is simply the point of rotation of potential bending. If something is bending, it's going to rotate at a point inside the material, and it's there. It's a really, really tiny space, infinitesimally small, and in that bending of that center, creating that space is in time, not in space, and it creates light. And suddenly the bubble is flooded with light that's been created from the center, and it bursts out. Now, it pushes back. As the light accelerates away from the center, the 0 point where it's created, it pushes back at the 0 point, creating an equal and opposite reaction, as per our father Newton. And that has another effect at the center, and it's a meter per second squared, an acceleration. So the reason that this makes light is that energy is created here by the bending moment. Actual energy of bending is there, and it can't do anything. It does work, it must do work, energy must do work. So it creates energy, it creates light. So it's energy moving. Energy moving, it doesn't have a velocity, as an acceleration of meters per second squared. Yeah, so I'm showing the next phases of what's happening, that the additional force of gravity bursts the bubble. It stretches it again. The relationship again of 2 pi is extended. That number is pushed bigger because it's not at the same angle anymore, and that rips the surface. And the light immediately bursts out. But the light bursting out has gravity, and it creates an equal and opposite wave to the original wave that was created. And can you see it there? So the wave is tracking it orthogonally, which means one goes up and down, one goes side to side, and it's because of the original rotation and spin from the beginning here. These waves are just repeating over here. What it does is it bends the light into the waveform. Now that waveform is repeated around the whole bubble. So I'm only drawing a section of it for illustration, so it looks like that. So you've got the original bubble with spin and angular orbital momentum, and you've got the motion of the wave around the outside, and you've got the additional light, so that's the additional energy that's into the water, and you've got the gravity that created that additional wave. And then that's called a photon. And that quantum is all about photons and what they do. So I've got a little simple one here. I'll just do a quick recap and then I'll just wrap up to say why it's so important. There you go. So the God equation that I'll show you at the end represents that. And it's showing how far the light will protrude through the bursting water bubble, because that will expand the bubble. Because as the wave of gravity heals that wound, the bubble can only expand, and it'll expand by that much. And it'll expand in space, in meters cubed. So the actual water bubble in space will increase by this amount. And that's how reality works. So that's how reality works. And there's an equation to back it up. And in terms of simplicity, it simply is mass energy. In E equals mc squared, Einstein's assumption is a mass energy equivalence. And so I'm simply saying, great, I've done some work for you, science. I found what mass energy is. It's not equivalent to it, it is it. And there it is, and it's called the unit of the energy that's created is called a Newton meter second squared. So the equation is now simply E equals nms squared. And each element can be explained in terms of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Consciousness, mass, and the energy that creates it, the moment. And you just simply pull out mass energy equivalence, and you insert the conscious mass moment, the Newton meter second squared, and everything makes sense, including the redshift on the James Webb telescope. And if that doesn't, you don't need to know that's, go and prove that to yourself, that's for those physics people to do. But you need to know that this makes sense to you, and it cures a problem that science is currently really, really shitting itself about. So you're one up on them. And why it's important to us as societies is exactly this, because look at the double slit experiment. If you don't know it, go and look at it. And know that what you're seeing is this. I am standing in the center, observing this experiment, the center of the bubble. And I am watching a bubble of photon zoom away from me. That photon is being created in quantum. That's what we see at that scale. It's being created. And so what it means is it's about to be real. So it's the future. And so that if you found a way of inserting a narrative through using high-tech machines like CERN, for example, to corrupt and manipulate the energy, you drop a narrative into it. And that narrative then comes out to us, so that reality contains their narrative. Do you see where I'm going with this? AI is already running the show, has been for 200 years with the printing press. It's the same programming. But what's happened now, that with the corruption of physics in the 1930s Germany, I know this is the language of 1930s Germany, isn't it? But you need to look at the history of physics. Yeah, how Einstein was driven away because he was about to find this out, and they shut him up. So, just please put me out of my misery. Love rules. Do the work. Choose.